thinking of ideas from problem, from venture, think ideas, then you have a conducive environment that supports you with that. Is it a mandate of institutions of higher learning to support innovation? Are they well-resourced to support innovation? When we see all those, we see the hub at KU, we see Dedan Kimathi University, we see in the private universities, like I said, Strathmore University and others, where we see that, we see a lot of vibrancy in terms of, people just trying to come up with ideas and thinking ideas. But is it a mandate of all institutions of higher learning to have this?
Very good question. It looks like you have... you almost became a professor.
Buana.
Sasa, what is to educate? That's where I would start. And what I lack is a Latin word that is called educare, which means to bring forth. Bring forth the potential that there is in someone. All right? So you have these students that you've been given coming from all over the country around you, and you are trying to bring forth the potential there is in them. That's one perspective, that what I'm producing in you is that which you're capable of doing. And I create an environment for you. Now, we have people who run organizations later, who build organizations later, and that nurturing of their potential happens in an education institution that provided the environment that they needed, the pieces and pieces they need to test themselves and develop their entrepreneurial capacity. The second thing I want to lay as a foundation to your question is Education 5.0. Now, Education 3.0 means you do teaching, you do research, and then you do community development. 5.0 means now you start thinking entrepreneur, you're thinking about innovation and industry. So, you see, education as was originally conceptualized as a conveyor belt, whereby you put people at the beginning, you give them a test, you tell them something, process them something. And by the way, the person who created the education system was informed by the industry, because industrialization happened before education, formal education system. That's why you will put the same number of children in a class, same age, process them, evaluate them, move them to the next one. That is industrial. Ukifika pale mbele, ukisema uni mujinga, unamutoa, unamrudisha, because that's a reject in an industrial environment. Then you move a few to go to market. That is, you become a professor, the cream of society. That is how it was conceptualized. But if it's the essence of education is to bring forth the potential there is in people, we have all globally gravitated that it is a responsibility of the institution to build the entrepreneurial capacity of a student. Not all of them will become, but those who will should be supported to be so. All right? Now, whether the institutions have what it takes to do that is an ongoing journey. In the sense that government will give you some resources. And by the way, government is shifting even its funding process and not giving institutions money. It is giving a scholarship to a student to go and get educated there. Government gives you money, that's okay. But then the institutions have a responsibility and an obligation to diversify resources that they need to build these additional pillars of 5.0. And there are many sources. And if you are bold enough to look for them, you will get them. There are institutions that have more. I will give my personal example. I began an institution about 3 years ago, a government institution. Now I have more funding from private sector and development partners and so on and so forth than the exchequer. So there's nothing strange about raising money because you have the space to do so. And globally, when you look at the trends of some of the leading institutions, government funding is a smaller percentage. So you get the resources to do the many, many other things. Partnerships. I just came from India, and I went to IIT, which is one of the best universities in India. The incubation centers in the universities are not run by the university. It is private sector that is given space by the university to come and run incubation programs. Why? Who understands incubation better than private sector? I have a big problem when government tries to do everything, including trying to nurture, run incubation programs and so on and so forth. Bring private sector into the equation. You will save money and you'll get better outputs.
Because they're motivated.
They are motivated, and that's their core business, is to build enterprises. Me, as a university, maybe my core business is to educate, right?
Yeah.
Then just synergize with the right partners and they will run that for you.
Okay. Yeah. When the youth innovate or when they're coming up with ideas, do they understand that ecosystem? What happens? So I have an idea. I want to build something. I want to come up with this is the problem, and I am coming up with a solution for it. They understand what it takes, or because that's where now you'll be like, okay, so how will I benefit from this? How will I make sure that I'm not telling so and so they run away with my idea? How do I protect my idea? How do I fund my idea? How do I grow my idea? And the kind of support that I need.
Many people wonder why I talk about institutions of higher learning a lot when I speak about innovation. It's because that's the largest population of young people in an organized setup. And if you crack that, you're cracking a large level of influence and the cascaded influence that it will have. And the answer starts to answer your question. By the way, I really like the way you've used the word ecosystem, because innovation is an ecosystem issue. No one institution or one individual answers everything about an innovation ecosystem. Innovation and development of ideas. And I gave the illustration of innovations moving up the value chain from level 1 to level 9. What that means is that the level of support you need and the kind of support you need at every level is different. And the partner you need at every level is different. You don't need intellectual property protection at the very end, nor at the beginning. It is going to happen somewhere along the way. Okay? The kind of funding you need at different levels of maturity is different. Government may be willing to give you a grant, all right? But private sector is not going to give you a grant. So the grant is normally very good when you're testing your ideas and validating ideas. But when you really need to scale, you need private sector funding and experience and market realities and analysis to then scale your idea. So to answer then the question about whether the youth understands, what we're trying to do is build the ecosystem mindset. All right? And this is why the institutions of higher learning play a very crucial role. Because if they grasp the concept that we are building an ecosystem within the institution so that the student understands that you need different levels of support up the value chain. And for you to test that environment, you need an incubation center. And that's why for me, every university must run an incubation center. Because that's the environment that helps a student in a real sense, not in an academic sense, in a real sense, to understand the various elements I need to build my idea. The skill sets that I need, the team that I need, I pilot it and I test it in that safe environment. The university is a very safe environment. You can get exemptions, you can work at night without a problem, and so on and so forth. By the time you get out, some realities strike, and you better have known what that means to do. Of course, there are incubation centers outside the formal education system, especially for youth who didn't go through that process. But I do have a big burden on how we leverage the institutions to strengthen the ecosystem mindset. And then when we produce people out there, they are able to interact better and influence others. Now, again, you're talking about a skill issue. Does a typical young person understand and have the skills to understand that it's an ecosystem issue? That this is where I'll get this support, this is where I'll get this support, and this is how I'll build up the value chain. That is how they have been developed. And that's where educare, go back to education. The education is not about how much you memorized. It is how much you're able to adapt to the environment and then produce the potential that there is in yourself. And the teacher has a big responsibility in building that capacity. Last but not least is the way education took place 10 years ago is not the same way it will take now, and is not the same way it's going to take tomorrow. Which means the person who is building the potential of this young person. We're talking about 23 million or so young people by the time we're in 2030 of Kenyans who are classified as young. It means we must be thinking nationally how we have ecosystems in different places that nurture that capacity of young people, knowing that they will get what they need along the way.
Now, it's Kenya's responsibility
Yes.
to make sure that this happens.
Correct.
You've been in existence for how long now?
3 years now.
For 3 years. So give us a case study of what you've done so far and how it's changing. Changing system, changing mindset, encouraging innovation.
Okay, so great. So since we started, of course, I walked in and find an empty institution, and we started building the system. So the first 1 or so years, you have to develop your instruments, get your board in place, get your staff, start recruiting, and so on and so forth. And we developed a strategic plan, and we have 2 pillars that we focus on. One is around what we call commercialization systems. So here we're helping institutions to think through their policy, their funding, their culture, and so on and so forth. And then the second pillar is on the startup ecosystem. And so here we work with a number of startups. I will give you so many examples of success. So I'll pick one on the commercialization systems, and I'll pick one on the startup ecosystem.
Okay.
Those are our pillars. So on the commercialization systems, we run a program for vice chancellors. Because I realized one thing. If you can transform the institutional leader of universities, cumulatively you are impacting a very huge population. All right? So I do train vice chancellors. Now, sometimes you think vice chancellors don't need to go to class, but I do. And if today I were to take you to about 14 vice chancellors whom I've worked with, you will sense the transformation that is happening. Each of them has developed a master plan, a 3-year innovation master plan for their own institution to try and re-energize and transform the institution. I can give you a list of a couple of them. Classic example right now, University of Nairobi has a 5-point strategy going forward. They're setting up through the support of the Chancellor now, they're setting up the Kennedy, Kennedy School of the one in the US in Harvard. They're going to be a campus in Nairobi on leadership. And it's going to be anchored in University of Nairobi. It's actually going to be potentially called Obama, and he's going to come here and launch it. They're setting up an innovation hub, thanks to that similar effort. There's already one innovation hub that is being put up in Kabete. The structures are already up. It's going to concentrate, that one's going to concentrate on the agricultural value chain. Classic example. I would take you to, I'm taking 14 vice chancellors to India next early October, because they're part of that training program. It's an experiential opportunity. We're going to immerse ourselves in IIT. I can tell you for free, the mindset of the institutional leadership is changing, and they're taking action about it. All right? I'll come to the startup ecosystem kind of support. We now are very close to attracting close to 14 billion from Africa Development Bank, specifically for the startup ecosystem, around funding, supporting very promising ideas. And we have just attracted some funding from IDRC as well, kind of closing down on that one. Another program with JICA, who have, what I did is we developed a 10-year innovation master plan. That's where I kicked off this from. And the president was gracious enough to launch it. We do run an annual Kenya Innovation Week. So the president came and we kicked off a 10-year innovation master plan of what we think we need to do to transform the ecosystem. 1, skills. 2, infrastructure and access to funding. 3, access to markets. 4, policies. And so we then translated that into specific programs, and a number of partners have come on board trying to, jumpstart the efforts. When government defines a direction, you easily get a lot of partners around it. On that same space of startup program, we created what we call a Presidential Innovation Challenge and Award, and that we kicked off last year. We had quite some funding, about 70 or so million to kick off the pilot. And we ran a national program saying, hey, do you have an amazing idea? We will give you funding and we'll give you support. And by November last year, we had the best winners from 30 counties who successfully met the requirements. And then each of them at national level now, the top were getting 5 million, and then the county ones were getting 500,000 or so to jumpstart their innovative startups. And now we're providing a lot of support, mentorship, coaching, and holding. We've looked for a number of industry players who are providing that support. And I would say that's a classic example of a scouting mechanism, a nurturing mechanism, and releasing mechanism. And I hope that we will scale these initiatives as we go forward.
2 questions.
Go ahead.
The VCs whom you will take with you to India,
Yes.
Immerse them into this whole ecosystem.
Yes.
In the hope that thought processes and whatever else goes along with it will be changed to cater for these changes that you want. How will you measure the understanding and the measurement? What is this output that you will want to see that will then inform you that indeed
change is happening?
Yes, and then that visit was not a waste of time.
Okay. So, skills is one thing I mentioned. in our 5-pillar strategy, of innovation transformation. And skills starts with a child or a youth or a grown-up or an institutional leader. So skills, we understand why we have to keep doing skills here. But then skills is not an end by itself. Skills, it's a means to something. So this vice chancellor who acquires some new skills must then translate that skill into something. So what we've done is we asked all the vice chancellors that we are going to help you to build a transformation plan for your institution that you own and are going to drive. Okay? Now, the quality, then I tell you what should be in your transformation plan. You should be thinking about your policies, because you're the head of institution, your policy. For example, what is the IP policy for your institution? Or what is the startup policy of your institution? Okay, what is your plan around infrastructure enhancement for innovation? What is your plan for innovation funding? Do you have a framework to allocate some funding for, or what are you going to do with the teaching and learning, so that you can encourage more and more entrepreneurial mindsets and so on and so forth? Those are the things that you must think about. Okay. Even if I take you to India and Europe, those are the things you're going to see, how they've actually done there. So once we agree that this is it, you have to translate this into a transformation plan and say, this is where you are as an institution, and this is where you want to be in 3 years. So each of them has done a draft transformation plan. All right? Now, when you own that plan as an institution, then you ask, whom can you work with to operationalize? So as an institution, you're going to allocate some resources, you're going to put a team, and so on and so forth. And the innovation agency is going to support you as follows. So we already have some interventions of supporting institutions, but those interventions must be informed by your transformation plan that you own. If I take you to India, it's not just for academic reasons, but you go and match your transformation plan and this institution. Then you go, no wonder they got this partner. No wonder. So that it becomes kind of a light bulb for your own work. All right? And then we have our session while in India to reflect on, so what are you going to do with your plan based on what we have interacted on? Okay. So when we go back, this is your commitment of what you're going to follow through. And I'll give you a last initiative that along the same line, 2 initiatives. Remember I mentioned an evaluation framework for institutions. I don't evaluate individuals. It doesn't really, it's a component. The Vice Chancellor is a component of an institution. So our maturity framework evaluates the entire institution. So when all the institutions came to me, and the Vice Chancellors were seated there, and we all agreed that all your institutions are either level 1 or 2. None of you is level 3, none of you 4, none of you 5. So here's the thing. I will be coming back to do another evaluation, 6 months, 1 year. The change that will happen will be as a result of the decisions that you make as a head of institution. And in order for you not to say that you don't know the changes that you will make, I'm going to take you to an environment where you will see where change has actually happened. So there's a follow-through. So for us, we follow through that maturity framework and evaluation. Secondly, we're going to be hosting another breakfast meeting for chancellors. Right? So the intention here is chancellors, you are the one who provides strategic direction for the institution and hold the vice chancellors and the rest of the team, councils and the like accountable. So once a year, we're looking now to engage, and they are the ones who tell us, how is your institution doing and how does... So sense of accountability has to be there across the board. So a trip is not just a trip. It's a means to something.
Yes, the executive and the leadership, have gotten the exposure.
Good.
They're not the ones who are going to do the breaking work.
And I have the answer to that.
Yes.
So for every institutional leader, we said, you've got to give us a team of 3 minimum. The best of your brains who can help you with this journey to translate, to follow through the specifics. And we call that institutional working group. All right? And so the head of institution thinks through, and every so often, every quarter, we are holding meetings with the council. By the way, we've built something we call Kenyan Network of Entrepreneur Institutions. And we've invited these institutions to participate. And whenever we hold council meetings, each institution must bring their key focal persons for operationalization. And we are building capacity on all those people and making sure you are supported at the institutional level, because if you don't have that, then you also struggle along the way. So there is a team for implementation, and it's also held accountable. by
So
an innovation agency.
I can hear what you're doing, Dr. Ari. You're going systemic. You are institutionalizing this idea.
Correct.
When shall we start feeling the results? When shall we start getting value for money from Kenya and people knowing, all right, so yeah, it's because of Kenya that now we have this, we have youth in creating employment, we have more money getting into our GDP.
Okay. Classic example, I was in a meeting with Britam yesterday, the head of innovation efforts in Britam. And I met, a couple of weeks ago, I also met their team. I'm going to use this just as an example. And they actually confirmed to me, we are beginning to see a difference in terms of what the students from the universities are looking like. They're already starting to feel the effect because it's not rocket science. By the way, to help you.
What do you mean? So how?
How? In terms of how the students think through the challenges that they are solving, the solutions that they are creating, the mindset, all right? Remember I said it's about an ecosystem. So the students are beginning to be more dynamic in the way they think about their problems. You know, when I was in university, I used to have students who come from computer science department, 3 of them, and they're trying to create an enterprise. And then you say, you need complementary skills. You might not help each other by just coming from the same department. That mindset is starting to gradually change. And private sector is the one who tells you. As we speak right now, Kenya is leading in Africa in terms of attracting investment to startups in Africa. We used to have this big 4 of Ghana, Nigeria, Egypt, South Africa. This 2024?
Kenya is tops.
Kenya leads.
Okay.
All right? That's an example of an indicator. And I will tell you finally one thing that is very interesting. We've got something we call the Global Innovation Index. Kenya currently ranks number 100, and it has been dropping for some reason because of not submitting data in a timely manner. But when I went into zooming into what is it they are measuring, I realized that we perform very well on the outputs, but not on the inputs. Inputs could be infrastructure, policy, funding, and so on and so forth. Outputs is the creative solutions, the startups, and so on and so forth. So we're doing very well on the outputs, but not very well on the inputs. So if you improve the inputs a little bit, what you'll have is significant increment in the output. And that's why I'm persuaded that we're on the right track and we're going to stick at it.
So policy and legislation. There's an innovation bill that is spearheaded by Senator Crystal Asige.
Yes.
I believe.
Yes.
Right? Have you interacted with this bill?
So this bill is actually called a startup bill.
Startups bill, yes.
There we go. So the startup bill, actually, if you study it, was crafted around the innovation agency. So when Governor Sakaja was a senator, he was fairly involved in that process as well. And the innovation agency is the anchor of that startup bill. And sometimes many people ask, okay, so why an innovation agency? Why not
a department?
Why not a department? Or why not an MSME agency and so on and so forth? The word startup is different from, it's not about starting up. It's about having an innovative, potentially scalable solution that can employ very many people and generate a lot of wealth and attract investment. MSMEs generally don't go that route. They have their place. If I have a small shop and that's okay, I can reproduce another one in another town, but I never necessarily want to attract
to become a supermarket.
Exactly. Maybe I may become a supermarket, but theoretically, conceptually, you're not trying to become a supermarket. You're not trying to attract VC funding and so on and so forth. So that's why we initiated the startup bill, so that we can think through the incentives for an innovator, the incentives for a startup, the incentive for a VC, a funder, and so on and so forth. And that value chain is unique in its own ways. So the answer is yes. At the heart of that startup bill is actually the innovation agency. And we've spent a lot of time trying to educate people. And part of the reason why I think we have not really gotten into law is because a lot of stakeholder engagement was necessary. It's a new language to a number of policymakers and practitioners. But I'm persuaded, just like a few other countries, we're headed there.
Well, it's a language that you need to keep talking, because there are those who get it and there are those who are hearing you for the first time. Somebody's saying, there's an agency like this one called Kenya.
Yes.
The Nairobi is saying, what is Kenya? It's a state corporation.
Yes.
Since when? What is it? So it's a language that you must keep doing.
Absolutely.
And then people will believe, or will get to understand when they start seeing direct results and tying those results to the
To
agency.
the effort, right.
Thank you very much for joining us today, Dr.
Asante sana ndugu yangu na kiongozi.
Dr. Tony Omwansa, the CEO of the Kenya National Innovation Agency, has been our guest. Thank you for tuning in to Kenya's biggest conversation today. Tomorrow, God willing, we'll be back.